Hey guys, this is Supernova. I'm discussing CNN's new program called Finding Jesus, Faith, Fact, Forgery. It's mainly about the evidence of Jesus. It talks about things that happened in the Bible and historical evidence we found relating to that. And I am just discussing the show. I'm expressing my opinions. I'm pointing out bias mainly. I'm talking about things that I learned. If you want to discuss the things that are actually in the show, the Shroud of Turin, John the Baptist, or the Gospel of Judas, I have no interest. I'm not an expert on any of these topics. I can't add anything other than what I have read and heard and such from other experts. It's all secondhand, and I imagine that's all you're going to bring to. I just don't want to have those discussions. I want to talk about this program. Now, the first thing that I have to mention, and I did already in part one, which was just about the first episodes of Shroud of Turin. Now that I've watched the first three episodes, all of them that have aired as of the time that I'm putting out this video, this show is extremely biased. It's made for Christians. I would think even specifically for fundamentalist Christians. It is edited in such a way that Christians can enjoy it. And in doing so, they have to take out a lot of the objectivity and truth. Now, I know it's not just the people that are on the show, because I've discovered that CNN puts up these pages on Monday nights after the show airs on Sunday nights that are Q&As. That people who have watched the program, they can tweet or write on Facebook to the experts that are featured on the program to get some further follow-up questions. And these experts are clearly answering in their own words. They've got measured phrases and objectivity, and they're not catering to fundamentalist Christians in their answers. These are clearly experts, and they're obviously being edited in the show. There's no way. They sound in the program like fundamentalist Christians themselves. They only give sound bites. That's all that the program will allow, and I'm pretty sure any little objectivity, rationality that they add is just being edited out because it doesn't make good TV for Christians. Now, we see a lot of this for instance, in the second episode about John the Baptist. They go through a discussion about everything that the Gospels say about John the Baptist. And strangely, they don't bring up any of the writings of Josephus, which are the only other source we have on John the Baptist. But instead, they just focus on the Gospel stories. And where there are contradictions in Scripture, and almost any time you just tell a straight Bible narrative that's found in more than one Gospel, you're going to have contradictions. They don't introduce any of them. They take out all the ambiguity. They make it sound like there's just a narrative going on, the one that they introduce. For instance, right after Jesus gets baptized, which happens at the beginning of all four Gospels, it describes how Jesus goes out into the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. And it says this happens immediately because the three Gospels that describe this instance say that it happens immediately. It's the next thing that happens. The Gospel of John, however, which is usually the gospel that contradicts the other ones because it's so different, does not have Jesus going out into the wilderness, and it explicitly points out the time periods that are happening. So there's no saying, well, the writer of John just felt like leaving it out. No, it says the first day of his ministry. The next day after getting baptized, he goes and finds Simon and Andrew and adds them as his disciples. The second day, he gets Philip and Nathanael. The third day, he attends the wedding in Cana where he changes water into wine. That's at the beginning of chapter 2. There's simply no room for him to go out into the wilderness for 40 days, let alone 40 hours. It's talking about day after day after day. And much of the Gospel of John is like this. There's just simply no opportunity to fit in such an event. Furthermore, when it describes the temptation of Jesus out in the wilderness, Mark doesn't describe that at all. It simply says it happens. But Luke and Matthew both give accounts, and they differ. So they have this woman named Dr. Lewis from Brown University describe the events that are happening. She tells of the temptations that happen in the order that they happen in Luke, and she specifies Luke. And on screen, they have these Bible citations to the verses in Luke that describe them. And I've noticed that every time they give a Bible citation, which isn't in all of their scenes, but sometimes they give a Bible citation when there's a contradiction. Like they're trying to steer you away from looking in the Bible yourself and say, oh, Matthew has it differently. The second and third temptation are in a different order. No, they don't bring that up. They don't lead you to it. They specify that they're looking at Luke and she's describing Luke, and she doesn't say this is how it is only in Luke. No, of course they don't add in any of that rationale. As she brought it up herself, as she probably did, she sounds like an expert. They cut that right out. So we see all kinds of stuff like that. And even in the narration when they're describing scenes, they say, again, in that same episode about John the Baptist, they mention the narrative about John the Baptist being born. And they say, it's not in all of the Gospels. And I thought that was hilarious because it's only in the Gospel of Luke. There are only two narratives about Jesus as an infant in Matthew and Luke. And Matthew doesn't mention anything about John the Baptist. So it's only in Luke, and the language they use is misleading. It's like saying Romeo and Juliet aren't in all of Shakespeare's plays, which is silly. It's technically true, but it's misleading. It makes it sound like they're in more than just one. So they've got a lot of bias in their editing and the way they describe stories. And again, in the third episode about the Gospel of Judas, they step away from the narrative that they originally tell in John 12 about Judas Iscariot being the one who is upset that Mary Magdalene is using this expensive perfume on Jesus' feet. And it says the next event that happens is that he goes to the chief priests and Pharisees to betray Jesus. But that only happens in Matthew. They make no mention of the shift from one story to another, because in Matthew we have the same story, but it's not Judas Iscariot speaking up and saying anything specific. And they go on later to tell about how Judas is marked as a betrayer. They tell a story again in John where Jesus identifies at the Last Supper which of the disciples will betray him, and he says, it's the one to whom I hand the sop that I'm dipping in the bowl, and he hands it over to Judas. And I think all three of the other narratives, no, two of them say it's the person who's dipping in the bowl with me, and the other one just says it's one among you, and the disciples argue, and then the next thing is Simon Peter says, it's not me, I won't betray you, and it just skips over anything having to do with Judas specifically in that gospel. I think it's Mark, but all this ambiguity is taken out. Now, they're marketing to Christians, so I understand, but Christians get this strange idea that all of the gospel narratives are coherent because they don't read the story skipping back between gospels and trying to learn it, say, oh, this is what happened in this gospel, let's see what happens in this one. Otherwise they would know this. They wouldn't have to wait for us atheists to point out these mistakes. But despite the bias, I am starting to like the program. John the Baptist was not all that entertaining because when it was just discussing the historical part, it mentioned this evidence found of John the Baptist. It said on this island underneath a monastery dedicated to John the Baptist, there was this box with 6 bones in it, and they carbon dated it and found that it matched the time that John the Baptist and Jesus are said to be on the earth. And it seems pretty accurate, and that's good history, and it was something that I didn't know. I learned something. But then the only other historical part besides just describing how the Gospels talk about John the Baptist is that they're checking this finger bone from somewhere in the U.S., Kansas City, I think, and they're trying to see if it also matches John the Baptist, and it's kind of anticlimactic because no, it doesn't. But that the whole historical part, the part that is actually like the meat of the program, only takes up maybe less than 5 minutes of the entire runtime. The Gospel of Judas was better. Not only was that informational, I learned a lot, even though I'd already heard of the Gospel of Judas and Gnostic Christianity from Bart Ehrman's online open course studies on the historical Jesus. I was I learned a lot. I didn't know that they had come up with this new conclusion that the Gospel of Judas was about how bad all of the Christians have gotten, and it was a political commentary on the Catholic Church. And I think not only does that play well to Protestant Christians, but it seems like it's all accurate information, which is great because everybody wins in that case. But it was an entertaining program to watch, and I would definitely recommend that third one to everyone. It's still got the bias there. You can't get around that, but it is a learning experience, and they didn't spend so much time in the program discussing Judas Iscariot because there's just not much in the Bible about him to say. Everybody knows he betrayed Jesus. It just doesn't linger on that very much. So. Overall, I think I'm going to continue watching the series. I've watched it thus far, and I'm enjoying it, despite the bias. So long as you apply some critical thinking, you can get some truth out of it, and I would definitely recommend the Q&As afterwards. I've got one more thing to mention about this, and it's not quite so much about the show. It's about people's perception of the show. They use a lot of carbon dating. When you're talking about relics that are found within the past couple thousand years, the only radiometric dating available is carbon dating. So they do this a lot. The Dead Sea Scrolls were carbon dated to find out their date. The bones of John the Baptist are carbon dated. The Shroud of Turin was carbon dated. They use this process a lot. Now, a lot of fundamentalist Christians don't like carbon dating because it gives results on many things that are more than 6,000 years old. Carbon dating has discovered artifacts that are 10,000 years old, 15,000 years old, and so on. And Christians who believe in a 6,000-year-old Earth obviously discard that, and they simply won't believe it. Well, this is cherry picking. This is special pleading. When you simply accept some results that you like, and if you get a bad result, you don't. I got into an argument about the Shroud of Turin, even though it would seem that the experts dated it to around 1300 CE. We still have all this debate about it because people want it to be from around 0 CE. You can't pick and choose which carbon datings you like. There wasn't anything in the program about the bones of John the Baptist being debated or double checked, or the same thing about the Gospel of Judas. They dated to around the time that people expected and Christians were happy with, so they didn't argue with it. And of course, scientists wouldn't say, unless of course it's a bad dating, like one lab did it and they knew that there was contamination, and so they just stopped right there and didn't even do a second dating. Generally, scientists hear about a carbon date and they're like, yeah, that's cool. I mean, we all agree that carbon dating works. We understand the science behind it, so we don't argue with it. But that's objectivity, that's rationality, that's being consistent and saying, well, if I'm going to accept it in one case, I'm going to accept it in all of the cases. Please do that. Be consistent. Don't throw out results that you don't like. I imagine practically every program is going to include carbon dating, and if you're uncomfortable with that, you probably won't enjoy the program. But anyway, that's all I have to say on it. I welcome your comments below, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.